Howdy, folks. It is Sunday, May 6th, 2012. I'm Skip Ruddertail, your otter editor, and with me, as always, is...
Let me think for a second. Toonses, that's right, Toonses, the driving cat.
It's been a while. You had to think about it, huh?
Yeah, I was thinking, okay, what are my other alter egos?
Right.
I have to bring this person out of the forefront.
Your luchador persona.
Luchador?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting into the Mexican thing already?
I think we are, yeah. We're just throwing it out there. But yeah, it's been a couple weeks. So, T-Cat here had to be home visiting the folks in Pennsylvania. So, these things happen.
For a bit.
It's just supposed to be one weekend, and then it turned into two. These things happen, so we had a little break there. But you guys are all cool.
Sorry, everybody. Cool. It's my fault as usual.
Oh my god, no.
Blame Toonses, because that's usually, the right track.
Eventually, once we've, like the Car Talk guys, once we've been doing this for 30 years or so, we'll just throw up we'll throw up classic episodes while we're on vacation or whatever.
Yeah, a story from 30 years ago.
Right, this week's story is a classic episode, so please don't call it.
Yeah, because people were calling in before.
Our operators are standing by. Hey, we got a comment.
We did get a comment from somebody. Yeah, that made me happy.
Yeah, we got comments.
And they liked the story.
They did like the story. It's a good story. So, yes, we have...
It's always good when people don't hate everything you're doing.
That is true. I usually I usually find that to be the case. They hate everything you're doing.
Well, if
how
people
often
do
hate
it,
though?
you can pretty often, but you can still operate through it. Just got to be really tenacious.
I guess that's probably what Obama's like every day. It's like, man, it's always occasionally once in a blue moon, he's like, that was a pretty good day. It's always good when people don't hate everything you're doing.
Yeah, I guess that's Obama, right?
That was like the day he, after they got Osama, it's like, not everybody hates everything. So yes, we read Where Angels...
Well, don't politicize that, though. Don't politicize it.
Too late.
That's un-American.
I think people, by this point, have a pretty good idea of our socio and political inclinations.
Do you think this is a pro-America story?
Well, let's introduce it first.
Okay.
So it is Where Angels Fear by Whyte Yote. And it was read for us by Buck Hopper.
Wonderful reading. Oh my god, incredible.
Buck Hopper, excellent job.
Tremendous reading.
We're thrilled.
Jeez, it must have been all the foam on the walls.
It was probably...
It was probably the foam on the walls. That must have been what it was.
Foam, you should hear him when you're just talking with him in a room.
Does he carry around like a box, like a three-sided box that he just puts over your heads?
If you're talking with Buck and it's just like a normal room with no foam on the walls, he's like, "Hi, I'm Buck Hopper, how are you?" And I'm like, "Whoa, Buck."
Is that how you really feel?
You're a little different than I thought.
Is that how you really feel?
That was the first time I met him. It took me like 5 minutes to figure out who he was.
So you think the foam is just to make his voice deeper?
The foam is key.
And he says we sound like chipmunks.
Yeah, we do. I know, right, exactly. That was my thing. It's like, we're chipmunks? Come on, dude.
We just didn't buy the foam. I'm sorry. We don't need to pad our walls.
Right. Except for mental health reasons. But no, thank you, Buck. It was a good reading. And I hope you don't mind the little ribbing. I don't know. I just, the thing about the foam is...
I can't afford
We don't have a room to put the foam in.
That also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The living room... it's a different aesthetic that I'm going for.
I mean, my room's pretty much a closet already, and if you were to walk into a closet that had a bed in it and like foam on the walls, you really would think this person has an issue or two.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not going to work where I'm living. I get kicked out.
When you lure the other guys home.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
you bring someone
they come in, they're like, whoa.
Why is this soundproof?
I was in on this when you put the muzzle on me, but not anymore. Anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, that's when I'm trolling the eagle.
Again, I think, the writing is fantastic. Whyte Yote's writing is...
Quality writing.
Always fantastic, and it's always a pleasure.
And have that great dialogue,
It's always
too.
a pleasure to read, yeah. Absolutely.
Because dialogue is the easiest thing to mess up and make something unreadable, especially when you're trying to it's clearly a romantic storyline here. So if the characters can't speak to each other naturally, you're gonna be off to a false start just to begin with.
Absolutely.
But no, I thought excellently written.
Well, and maybe let's start with your. I kind of wanted to throw out the writing's good, so we almost don't have to talk about it because the writing's good, I think. And so let's talk about. I think we can agree on that, and that gets us into, okay, what can we talk about? Well, we could talk about...
Do you think it's a pro-America story?
What's happening in the story and the implications of the story and the different personas, and that's a good place to start, a pro-America story.
But before you say that, I just want to say, if this story tastes like anything, it tastes like freedom. Like corn syrup and freedom.
Yeah, and that way. But see, that's I think an example of the good writing. No, we're already back into the good writing because it was definitely tongue in cheek and it's definitely said with a wink.
And I like the way you described it. It's almost like offensively sweet, almost almost too thoroughly sweet. How they described
I think the surface reading of the story, if you ask that question, is the story pro-American? Is the first reading is like, well, it isn't about America, or you'd say, well, yes, it is because they're trying to get to America.
It's about America because, North America and South America comprise America. There's that, too. But
that is a smart-ass explanation.
But it's still a story about the United States because, the United States is the goal of the whole enterprise here. I mean, the guy's working for a paper in the United States. His entire... we're even back in Boston by the end of the story. Mm-hmm. The entire... first half of the story is about getting to the United States. Right. Do you think this conveys a message that the United States is itself like a jewel or undesirable?
No. Well, I think it's condemning of the United States in part because
for its
the United
policy?
States, right? The United States is why this problem is happening. As much as it's a goal, it is also the cause of this problem. And then you could say, well, and I mean not just the border. Wait. Not just the border policy, but in terms of the global economic things happening that make this big difference on one side of the border and the other.
Now I have a question. Is that the is that the context you put it in yourself, or is that the context it's couched in the story? Because in the story, I don't read very much that is very critical of the United States. All I ever really read is people that are very willing to enter the United States. And there's actually a time in the story where what's the journalist's name again? The lead character. But basically, he's saying that he won't judge whether what Trago does is good or bad. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, maybe it might be better to take a stance on this to give the story a bit more life rather than just to be non-committal to. But again, my problem is that I think it ultimately just boils down to a romance. Well, and I think the romance ends up taking the driver's seat here, and the actual issues of immigration and nationality and so on are kind of put to the back seat.
I think that's what is condemning actually in the story about the United States, and that's where it comes through is something you just said, is that the author's stance is so neutral for most of the story and separated from the events happening.
Right.
And that's the subtext in this story that is condemning of the United States. Because I think the story says this is, in a large degree, this is our fault, and yet we act as if, that's an internal to Mexico problem.
But where in the story do you get that?
Because he can't be neutral. And this is where I'm getting that. That is an untenable position.
Neutrality is untenable.
Yeah, for him because of this romantic entanglement. That he wants to go, and this is why the story I think gets beyond. If you had written the story as U.S. policy is bad, a lot of it's kind of a surface story, and yes, maybe it's at some levels it kind of expands and educates better on the topic. This is saying U.S. policy is bad by looking at impacts on individuals without trying to illustrate over the larger topic as whole. But then the person reading, exactly, without being too, but the person reading this says, wow, this was really bad. I mean, what happened to these people? This is really sad. And what are the implications? Why is that the case? Why is this sad? What's going on? And so this is a kind of, story about a guy who tries to put himself in a situation where he is there and observing, and he can't be. It's an untenable space for him.
Right, he can't stay there, is what you're saying.
Yeah, he can't stay there. Mm-hmm. And that's where
Isn't that where the romantic energy really comes from, though?
That is where the romantic energy, that's part of that. But we were talking about this larger concept of, is there a kind of political message that we can attach to the story? And I think there can, and I think it's done in the best possible way because it isn't didactic and it isn't over the head. And on the surface, the story doesn't look like it's about it at all. It looks like it's about a romance in spite of the political sit.
I guess I prefer just the Upton Sinclair didacticism where he just smashes you over the head with it enough times so you can't ignore it. I don't know, maybe I wasn't reading enough of the subtext, but just the whole message of the story where, like, just it gets the United States is the place to be. I think it's just, it doesn't really even seem to reflect the reality right now when it actually seems as if emigration from the United States from migrant workers is actually is increasing while immigration into the country is slowing down.
The Grapes of Wrath. It's like reading that, and yes, they're all the time trying to get to California. They get there, and it's not really any good.
Yeah, it's no heaven.
And I think that's kind of, getting the U.S. is fulfilling the same kind of role. It's a similar story, and with all respect to Upton Sinclair, I would argue that in many ways the way we tell stories has grown more sophisticated in 100 years, and so you don't need that same didacticism to
the way it comes off to me is, if without the didacticism, it comes off much less conveying a message and more so using a context for an intriguing storyline. Mm-hmm. Basically, I think he's just kind of using the high drama of border crossing and that kind of.
I think it's
just to make the romance a bit more dramatic. Really, that's it. That's the way it reads to me. I would
argue that might be the case for two reasons. One, I have too much respect for Whyte Yote to feel that he would just do that. Two, I think the issue is such a politically charged one. He's writing this story. I mean, it's a new story. He's writing it in an election year. He lives in California. Uh-huh. So you can't write a story about crossing. I would argue that it is impossible to write a story in the United States in 2012 about crossing the Mexican border without having a political implication in the story.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You'd have to read that into anything that's been published, but I just would prefer a bit more didactic.
I would say you would not write the story if you didn't
have
intend a political linkage.
But then I just wonder why the romance seems to take center stage on it, because
I argue because it's a sophisticated story, and that's why the romance takes the center stage. Because he's using this accessible romance, something that we can connect with 1,000,
see, like, I just don't connect
miles from the border as a way to access this larger political issue.
But that is what I'm saying,
in ways that we can understand.
Maybe this is just me, but when we're talking about, like, serious issues, something like a romance tacked onto it just confuses me. I don't know if that's just how I tend to read things, but I always feel as if, like, the drama should be the drama. And if the drama is a border crossing, the political implications of it, I don't want to see some romance that's going to start muddying the water there. I always feel like that's just my
I think the two are
opinion.
inextricable, though, in this case.
Inextricable? What do you mean?
Well, they're happening because of each other. is what I'm trying to say.
They're happening because of each other?
You know, the romance, he's there, he's falling in love because he's there to document the border crossing.
Right.
And the drama of the border crossing is heightened because this is somebody now that he loves. And this
it
is
ends
the thing,
with him giving his life basically to save him.
And this is the thing that forces the American to become involved, or at least to not be neutral anymore. This is the thing because
he suffered this great personal loss.
Because he's in love. You know, he can no longer be neutral.
But I still don't see a payoff there. I mean, the end of the story is him pretty much just telling his work buddies he wants to be left alone and having a conversation with the Kuwaiti immigrant maid worker. I don't know what term you'd want to use specifically. I feel like as if like I'm biting at the apple and there's nothing there. You know what I'm saying? I feel as if there's no payoff in the political dialogue in this story. While there's an obvious payoff in the romantic dialogue of the story.
And I think maybe your frustration...
It sets it into a world where you can easily like project your own views and understand, like, you know, but it doesn't really tell a story in that world.
I think your frustration is that, at least on the political side of things, there's no answer. And maybe that's where your frustration is coming from. If you're going in, and this is because you read so much about politics and in history, just like I do, but if you're going into this saying, oh, here, if you're looking for a discussion and an analysis of these issues of migration, this isn't it. It's more this is important and it's affecting people's lives. Is there analysis or of what to do next? No, there isn't. If there was, I think we'd kind of start treading into that territory that Ronnie's interview story got into, where we start crossing this line into a kind of like, well, here's what we should do, you know, and
well, that's just dry though. I mean, I like that this story culminates at least in, you know, a high action moment, like a gunfight at night out in the desert. That's cool. Or not just like some guy interviewing a guy. That's great. I just would I don't know. I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing the story because it's, as a romance, it's a wonderful story. I mean, I can recognize that well enough. I just always feel unfulfilled, I believe, by romantic storylines. That's all.
Oh, okay.
Is that it?
Maybe.
Because
you tell me.
I feel as if like that happens in real life all the time as a romance. I mean, I've lived a romance, but I don't know.
I'm a very romantic guy, so
yeah. Is that it? I don't know. I guess. I must be
my
sounding
challenge
awful
for
cold
Whyte
right now.
Yote still stands. I believe I've told Whyte Yote that he needs to write us a story with a happy ending, and we're still waiting on it.
No, I don't want any happy ending.
I want a happy ending.
Forget that.
So we got it.
I like sad endings.
Well, we had a couple now, so I get a happy ending one, right?
Whatever, sure. Yeah, okay. You can have a happy ending or two. But no, I like this one where
But
jeez, I'm crow. I shouldn't have walked right into it though.
Yeah.
I really should have seen that coming. And that's a wall
That's
clearly
also
marked.
what she said. Should have seen that coming.
I'm not even thinking of things before I say them. Oh my goodness. Whatever.
How can you not love me? But no, I'm a very romantic guy, and I was. I think one of the interesting things here is that, well, we've definitely got racial implications here, and it's an interesting use.
But you don't think it's a little bit exploitative?
Race. Well, it's interesting that we have our coyote is a coyote, and that's so obvious. For
those who don't understand the term,
interesting. Yes, go ahead.
No, I was actually prompting you. You'll give a better definition every time.
Well, a coyote in parlance of the Mexican border crossing is the usually guy who helps people cross the border. So he's sort of a guide.
He's a professional border crosser.
He's a professional border crosser. Yeah. And so there's that. Then who are the other demis we see? Animal people.
Human X furry, by the way. We haven't done that before. No human X furry before.
We didn't see any sex this time, really.
We got a hint of it.
We got a hint of it. I mean, it was implied, but we faded to black if we were watching a movie. It's like, and then the screen went black, and then the kids were like, "What happened?" Like, nothing. They kissed and fell asleep. That's exactly what happened in this story. They kissed
and fell asleep. Yeah. Woke up sticky.
But right, oh god. So the three demis, three I believe, right?
That's a cool term, by the way, at least for furries. Not calling the furries.
Demis.
That's cool.
The three demis we see are all Mexican ancestry.
They're all candid too, aren't they?
No, Acatamundi is actually a relative of the raccoon.
The raccoon.
So one of your kins.
One of
your kinfolk. They're awesome too. I remember down in Tikal in Guatemala, like this walking down the road, and this family or herd or whatever you call them, about 10 of them came down the road towards me, and they're all rooting through the leaves with their long noses, and they've all got their tails straight up in the air, which are about 2 feet tall.
Oh wow!
So they hold their tails straight up in the air like they're samurai flags or something, and they're all just going around the street going like snorting and grunting to each other, and it was very weird and very awesome.
That's cool.
So they're very cute. But yeah, so we have but all the demis we see are Mexican ancestry, at least. And we don't have any explanation of how they got to be, which I think is also interesting. A lot of right, and I think that's fine. I think you just kind of accept that it doesn't matter to the story.
Yeah, because not every story has an origin story for everything in it anyhow. I mean, you would just presume that's just part of nature and the story and go with it.
I think that's something that I want to actually laud Whyte Yote for in this case, because I think a writer who is less practiced would feel, even in a story this short, would very often feel need to throw in some kind of explanation there. Why are these people, and why are they Mexican? Or why are there wolves and coyotes in Acatamundi? And he really doesn't in a world, and you don't see that if everybody's people, but here's a world with people and animal people, and he doesn't explain it. And it's okay in this story. I think if he was going to write something longer, we'd probably need an explanation at some point.
Do you think everybody should have to put forth some kind of furry origin story?
No, I don't.
You don't think? Because I know you have your furry origin theories.
Favorites, yeah.
You know my furry origin theory is?
No.
So basically, we're created in God's image, right? Mm-hmm. So one day the furry gods appeared in the air. They had human god, and they killed him, and they said, "We are your gods now, and now we're furry people."
Do they have to kill him?
Well, yeah. If we're presuming it's part of some kind of spiritual godlike
very,
warfare.
Old Testament-y,
that's what I'm going for.
Okay,
that's my furry origin story.
Coexist?
No. They had to slaughter the old god to take over their followers.
I actually, speaking of this, they identified just this week a gene mutation which seemed to have led towards the greatly increased brain growth in humans, which emerged not very long ago, a couple million years ago, I guess. And it's basically, if there's an extra copy of this gene, our ancestors' brains grew so big, and if there are extra copies of it, then they grew really big. And they said it's a kind of change that maybe even happened in only a generation or two. Wow. Basically across Homo sapiens, because it would have been so advantageous, and it probably would have led us to forming sophisticated language, right? Because our brains, and that part of our brains grew so fast. So what I immediately thought, being the good furrer I am, is it's like, okay, so if there is this gene, could you do the same in other species? Yeah. Could you, now that we're at the point of manipulating genes to this degree, could you say, okay, here's a gene that it seems to be directly responsible for increased brain growth and increased development of language centers, and so what if we gave that to a raccoon so that instead of having an otter?
Instead of Homo sapiens, we have Canid sapiens, and so on, so on, so on.
Yeah.
Because sapien just means intelligent or something like that.
Yeah.
Homo sapiens.
Give that to an otter or a raccoon. or a cat.
That's probably the most reasonable origin story I've heard. I still like my god slaughtering one though.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's one of the things I like about furry is that they're different. Because the genre kind of straddles a whole bunch of other genres, and that you have fantasy explanations, and you have historical explanations, and you have science fiction explanations.
It's like an interpretive framework for everybody, and that's part of me. Like the big fun in furry literature is just figuring out how this furry literary framework is being used by somebody, because everybody obviously has their own like interpretations of the images.
Right.
So I mean, it's interesting to see it applied in such a political way here too, because I don't think we've had such distinct racial political representations of furriness before. Like in this story, all of the outsider characters, so to speak, are demis.
Right.
And the human X furry thing does kind of gross me out though.
It's weird,
it's too close to bestiality for me.
Funny you mention that, but I usually don't like reading stories with humans and furries either, and I know we've talked a little bit about that, in the past.
And I think the only reason, I think it would be a bit more acceptable, because there are often cases where it's, there's a furry world, but there's a human in it. It's like the opposite here. It's like human world with like a smattering of furries in it, which makes it seem really weird.
But that, I think, as you said, that makes them serve very ably in this, and very naturally in this case, as an other, as a minority.
But I'm just talking about the sex specifically.
Without feeling forced, without feeling hit over the head about it, because they're not talking about that fact. There's no, again, in this story, there's no discussion that, where they say, oh, we're a minority and we're being mistreated. Nobody explicitly says that, but you pick up all these things about it. And then you pick up all these ways that they still have agency, and that they still have, possess power, even if it isn't equitable. So I love, you heard me in the car when they talked about a little bit of strawberry and the antifreeze, you thought that was funny. And I laughed,
I got a kick out of that.
Yeah, because it was such, I love the idea, and it's a funny idea, but it also is, again, this really illustrative example of, here are these people who figured out, a slight advantage they have.
It makes it especially furry, too. It's a furry thing. It's not something humans would do. It's not something animals would do. It's something furries would do. Mm-hmm. That's, really clever writing then.
Yeah. It's something that they would invent. So, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was the kind of morality of Trago when there is the confrontation in the desert.
Right.
Because we have, within the space of probably 5-10 minutes here, not a very long amount of time, we go from Trago letting the guys shoot Mateo, after Trago kicks him and stuff, shoot Mateo, and then, like I said, less than 5 minutes later, Trago sacrificing himself to save the other people in the car.
That one I wasn't so sure about.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is maybe, for me, in some ways, the most questionable part of the story.
Yeah, and that's to me where the romance really starts to bridge with, what would be, more just a focus on the drama. Mm-hmm. Because in a romantic storyline, that really does underline how much the journalist means to Trago and their connection and just how important they are. But if you're just trying to think of it more like in terms of a drama, it makes no sense at all, because he just gave up one guy to save the family, but he won't give up the other guy?
It does make sense if he gave up the one guy because the one guy wasn't honest with him.
Oh. You think that's it?
He gave up... That's my read of it. He gave up the one guy because Mateo did not say that, he'd stolen money. Did not tell him about that he'd stolen money. Mm-hmm. And that's why, and then
but there's no real questioning of this in the moment either. It's just kind of taken,
put all of them in danger,
right?
So that's okay. The other people, like the reporter, hasn't done anything to betray him. Hasn't put them in danger through any fault of his own. Like his presence there puts him in danger, but through any fault of his own hasn't. And so it's this morality, which in some degrees I want to say is, knowing what I know about the border trade and stuff is romanticized. Like, would many coyotes do this? No, I don't think so. And that's coyote border crossers, not, I don't want to be speciesist here. But would many coyotes, make this kind of sacrifice to save somebody? And from what from at least what I've read, most of them are very much more cutthroat and just get their money, get the people across the border. Sometimes don't even get the people across the border, but still get their money. What I would see here then, at first I was like, well, would he do that? And then it's like, but the story it reminds me of a Western. If we're going back to a genre. Well, right, we've got a standoff in the Mexican desert. Which is, classic. I mean, there's a setting there. That's true. And who are our Western heroes, from the movies? Like, we've got, Gary Cooper in High Noon, which is, or we've got maybe even better in this case, because it's a suspect picture, or a figure already living outside the law, a rogue, or someone has the devil in him, as they say in the story. Yeah, the devil in him. We're probably talking more about one of Clint Eastwood's characters from the Man with No Name trilogy, who is a, kind of outsider and comes in, kills people, has no problem doing so, and yet obviously lives by this particular moral code. Right. And that's why he's the hero of the movie, because even if it's not our moral code, or it's a skewed moral code, it is still a moral code.
Wasn't that part of the theme of Scarface, too?
I don't know,
Which, by the way, I was wondering. I was wondering at what point did the guy become Scarface in Buck Hopper's reading. It did sound kind of like Scarface at some point. I was thinking that.
I don't know. Scarface is one that I probably have to watch again, because I, watched it. I've only seen it once, and I didn't remember being hugely enamored of it.
It's one of those movies that people love to misinterpret about, Tony Montana must be a great guy. No. It's about he's a terrible guy. Yeah, but he goes out and he does, fends for himself. No, that's not the point. He kills a bunch of... No, but he's like...
Yeah.
He's a go-getter. I mean, he's the top of the pile. No, you're not understanding it.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
No, I think he's... Yeah, so I wouldn't say like that, because I think, Clint Eastwood's characters in the Man with No Name trilogy are usually significantly more moral... Or I'd say they're always more moral, than Scarface. Because, they have this particular code, and they won't...
You need the morality to justify the violence.
Yeah.
I guess so.
Yeah. The story. And so, yes, he isn't... Is he doing what is necessarily what we could say would be the most realistic thing? No. Is he doing the most realistic thing in terms of the conventions of a Western? Yes.
In the terms of a romanticized storyline, he's doing what's necessary.
Yeah. And I'm saying that's okay.
I'm just saying this is where the break really occurs for me. That's just where it is.
For me, I would argue that it doesn't have to be a realistic story to be a good one.
I thought it would have been a much better story if he just gotten out of the car and gotten shot. That'd have been a much better story. I mean, I told you I like unhappy endings. I thought
that would have been there would have been nothing left there.
Yeah, I know.
And this
pretty
story
nihilistic,
leaves right. And this story leaves us.
I was really lost.
With
a
sad ending, but leaves us with something, and I appreciate having something. So I will hand that to you, Whyte Yote, is that you could have left us with nothing, but you did leave us with something, and I appreciate that, even if it wasn't a happy ending. We're left with hope. There's that little bit down at the bottom of the box, I guess, and so right now you wonder. At the ending of the story, I can see why it's a little bit frustrating to you, and I think it could be to other folks, because it is very kind of, in some regards, a non-ending. In that, he's going home to light a candle, and, so that shows that, maybe he's thinking about this more, accepting about it more, and we don't know what's going to happen next. But I feel like because he's been there and done this, he isn't going to be neutral anymore. And what happens that he can't be.
It doesn't tell us what the content of his award-winning magazine article says.
No, it doesn't either.
But no, that's what I'm saying is I don't get any kind of sense this has affected him in any way other than his personal loss. And I think that is what I would be looking for.
I think it will. I think you're
honestly just kind of reading your views into the story, and maybe perhaps the views that you might be more knowledgeable of Whyte Yote. Maybe you know his views, but I don't know his views, and I can't. I wouldn't be able to just read them into the story myself, and I'm trying not to project my own views onto it either. So all I'm getting out of it in the end is a personal romance.
I can't make a... But the thing is, based on that, like, I can't make a conservative reading out of this story that would hold any water. So, that's kind of why I'm saying what I'm saying.
I just thought it focused way too much on the gringo.
It does. And that is a good point. And I think that's a valid point that we could say.
I mean, what was the joke I made when we were at the grocery store? It was like, when Rosa Parks sat on the front of the bus, she didn't know she would sit next to the love of her life.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I read this story in a way. And it's like, cynical and it also happens to be somebody who looks exactly like the author.
And that's a very cynical
it's very
take,
cynical.
But
I know.
I think there's some valid criticism in there. Let me go on.
I mean, I do the same thing though. That's why I'm critical of it. I mean, I never even think about the possible racial implications of my story until I'm reading them afterwards and kind of realizing it would be very easy to read this as some kind of minority character. Just the terminology I'm using. I don't know. Well, he's at least being more delicate than I am then in that regard. We can't have the dogs barking in the back of the podcast. Those are some bad dogs.
No, I think you're right. And you don't want to get into in the story because of the nature of its structure and its politics. I think kind of comes close to I think you could read it that way.
I'm critical of the stories that try to observe a outside culture, but it's very clear that the focus of the story itself is a different culture. Like, the focus of the story is very clearly a white American. I mean, they say it multiple times. And so, like, it kind of makes the story feel handicapped from the first, because you have to imagine you're not getting an authentic experience. Kind of like when he's talking about the food. Like, it's just so much more authentic in Mexico than in the food trucks. And I guess I'm applying kind of the same feeling here to the story itself. I'm getting not much more than a kind of a romance out of this from someone who is so very clearly kind of on the outside of it, and maybe you could focus it more on the...
I think that is what saves this story in terms of, this kind of racial framework, in getting into this old kind of colonial story, I suppose, is kind of what you're talking about. And what saves this story is that rather than being the hero of our story, the protagonist is not. He is... he doesn't really do anything, and he is on the outside, and I think that's what keeps it from becoming one of those stories. It doesn't turn into, we were saved by the white guy.
No, but the hero gives up his life for the white guy. It seems pretty close to me.
I think he gives up his, There is that, and, it's like, in watching an old movie, it's like, there's, the black lieutenant, like, who's going to be the first killed by the... whatever. And yeah, you could see that in this movie. I feel like... I think it's a valid concern. I don't think it crosses... I feel like there's a fuzzy line...
It's not insensitive. I'm just saying it leaves something wanting. It's not like he wrote an insensitive racist story. I'm not saying that.
I feel like there's a fuzzy line there, and it doesn't cross it for me. I feel like it's still okay because it carries things outside, and because I think he's trying to rope... a certain kind of reader into thinking about this more, and that's his connecting character. That's our protagonist. Yeah,
I see.
So I think that's our entry point character, and that's why he's there.
I see. I have a question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are you accusing other people of racism?
It really depends.
I'm like a 10. I love doing it. I love calling other people racist. Don't you find that fun? Really? Am I the only person who enjoys this? And I enjoy it because I realize everybody must have really awful racist thoughts. I mean, come on. Did you ever spend 10 minutes inside your own head?
Yes.
And you didn't find any racist thoughts whatsoever?
Well, I haven't
Have you not examined them? Turned them over and thought, well, this could maybe be.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
See, I just find
it fun
because I think a lot of people don't do that.
Racism class, so no, it's important. Absolutely.
I just think it's fun more than anything because people really respond negatively to it.
I don't know if I would never call it fun. I would call it important.
Really? Important? Oh, it's important.
I would call it important to think about
your own
subjectivity. Fun. But I don't know. I don't know if it's fun necessarily. Though there are a lot of comics that make it fun, so I will give you that.
No.
So I think it can be. I don't know. I'm just talking with my own personal.
It's fun just to get the reactions from people. Yeah.
But no, I think we've got a particular entry character here who is purposely written because it's a world with furries, and it's a world with Mexicans, and it's a world with Anglo white people, and in this world with all these different possibilities, like there's a reason why this character is a white guy. A white Anglo guy.
He's a journalist from the United States.
Well, yeah, but he could be a black journalist from the United States.
Why is he a white journalist?
He could be a Hispanic journalist from the United States. He could be a Japanese journalist from the United States. So I think it's because Whyte Yote is, again, it's this political thing where he's explicitly talking to the people who probably care about this or have the least reason to care about this because it is talking about privilege. If you're white journalist and this is what happened to this guy, if you're a white journalist from Boston, you don't have to worry about this because it doesn't really affect your life particularly directly. And here's a case where he has to go down there and then he learns that, yeah, it affects my life. And that's why he's this, because who is the most privileged person, group of people in the U.S.? Well, that would be white, middle class, right? Yeah. So here's a good example of here's somebody with a lot of privilege in our society, and throwing him into a situation where he is literally a moment away from being shot, and that privilege doesn't matter.
See, I asked if this was a pro-American film pro-American story because I think there is something that is is a little bit devious about ever representing the United States as a positive destination. And I think about this only because I think of how these expressions project themselves in other parts of the world. If you've ever read A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bey, or how you pronounce his name, Beah, one of the most illustrative parts in that memoir is when he's talking about watching films from the United States. It was Rambo specifically. And just how great and incredible the United States seemed to these African child soldiers just because of what they saw in the movies. So, do you think just writing a story where the characters are just so enamored with the United States and the entire idea is just to get to the United States, do you think maybe that in and of itself just makes it kind of...
No, because I think there's this also clearly in the story, like I said, there is clearly in the story a problem with the United States and a problem with how the U.S. is not dealing with the situation as exemplified by our protagonist.
Dealing with the problem that everybody wants to live there because it's so wonderful.
No, dealing with, well, in part because, why is that the case? Because of all these structural inequalities the United States and the IMF are behind. So yes. Yes.
Okay.
I think that's in the story. I think it's definitely in the story. And I wouldn't call the story anti-United States. I don't think it is. But I think it's critical of the role the United States playing because that is who our protagonist is. He is the embodiment of the United States in this situation.
I think this is where we defer because I just think it could have been a bit stronger on criticism of the United States because it could have been more forward. That's all. I think it was a great story. I thought it was very well written. I'm just talking about my...
I think it was pretty darn critical, but that's me.
Well, I want someone to get smashed up in the head and get a bloody nose. I think our standards are just different. Maybe you just prefer the more dry, intellectual sort of offense. I want to see someone eviscerated.
Okay.
In terms of an argument.
Easy there, Tamerlane.
What?
I said easy there, Tamerlane.
Don't get the reference right over my head. Explain to the people on the broadcast.
Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan.
Yeah. Tamerlane.
Genghis Khan.
That was another name.
Yeah. Okay.
It was Tamerlane.
I guess I'm just saying, like when I read something that has political connotations to it, I love to see them really exploded and pursued really aggressively. That's all.
What I would argue is,
it ends up reading like a tease to me. That's what it is. It ends up reading like a tease to me when it's set within this within this context, and it has so much potential for this kind of exploration, but then ends up being mostly romance. It's a great story. It just ends up being a tease for someone like me who prefers something
My
different.
response is you are ready to hear that kind of critique. And I would say most people are not. And this is from experience having taught roots of racism at college level, which, gets into structural inequality and all these things, is if you lay it on the students the first week,
I see what you're saying.
Half of them will stop listening to you because they have instantly decided that you have this political viewpoint and you hate the U.S. and whatever, and they stop listening to you, and they will never listen to you for the rest of the semester. So you have to instead slowly build up evidence, add in little things, add in historical things until it is so obvious that things like structural inequality are still taking place in our society, that at that point, well into the semester, they have enough evidence experience that they can't, they have to accept the conclusion because now they know what you're talking. But if you lay it out on the first day, half of them will go, that's not true. Why are you attacking me?
So what we're looking at here is introductory immigration issues for privileged white men through furry sex.
I think a bit. Yeah, I think so. I think there's a bit of that.
It could have been more.
I don't think that's. Then. I don't think that's the whole story. Obviously,
if there's any erotica, this is an erotica.
I think that is an important component to the story.
If there's an erotica, this is erotica because it does that like fade to black thing. Even more erotic. I think even erotica is a bit more.
Yeah, this isn't quite there. No, this is just a story. I think this is a pretty clean story.
Oh well.
They're a gay couple, but that's it. And I'm not willing to go like, oh my God, we got to protect people from the gay couples and story. No, obviously we don't believe that. But no, I think because you are ready for one level of critique in terms of policy does not mean everyone is.
I see what you're saying. It's just kind of like an introductory lesson, but
I'm not going to say that's why the story exists, but I think that's part of why the story exists.
All right. Why do you think the story exists? For the romance?
I think he had a story to tell about. I think it is largely a political thing, but I think he, had a story to tell about a person who has to become involved at some point. And like I said, that person is an avatar for the country, I think, on more than one level. So, yeah.
I believe that furries are the future.
Okay.
I've been saying this, by the way. I think furry nerds are the future of the internet. It's going to be like jocks in the 80s. And then in like the 2030s, we're going to be looking back on the 2010s and 2020s and how the furry culture was like really the root of all the evil, like the degradation of society.
You're so down on furries.
That's just how. No, I'm joking. Like, come on now. I'm trying to pass a popular culture narrative here because that's how it always seems to work, right? Like for like 5 years, things are popular. And then 10 years later, that popular thing was the cause of all the problems. Those fucking hipsters, and those fucking jocks, those fucking hippies, those fucking flapper girls. And then 30 years after that, they're just the history. So like then in 2040, we're just looking at like, remember when furries were popular on the birthday cards your grandchildren getting on your 65th birthday?
Like, oh dude, it's a furry party. Just like that, just like in the teens.
But they'll completely get like the chronology. We're gonna dress up in fursuits and watch Jaws in 3D.
Yeah, nice.
It's like, dude, no, that was like the 70s, man. Get your fucking pre-American. I don't know.
Yep. I like it.
Like, I believe furries are the future. What?
No. Do you have anything else to add?
No.
All right. I really enjoyed it. We both enjoyed this story, I know. So thank you.
Good story. Thank you,
Whyte Yote.
Thank
you, B-Hop, for reading it.
You keep saying it's Whyte Yote, like coyote. So what?
Yeah.
Whyte Yote, like coyote.
Well, you could say coyote either way.
Yeah.
I like the coyote with
he's a coyote.
He's a coyote.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's a coyote.
Right. So it probably comes from Bugs Bunny cartoons where, the couple where he actually talked and he was like, Wile E. Coyote, super genius. And he says, so that's where I get it from.
Wile E. Coyote?
Wile E. Coyote.
I like coyotes. That's what they say where I grew up, coyotes.
They're beautiful. They're some of my favorite animals, yeah. I've heard them sing a couple times. but in Colorado.
What do they do?
I've seen around here. Yeah, auto-tune. They're very hip.
Auto-tune the moon.
They're very hip. No, they got family singing up by the cabin on two different mountains, kind of singing to each other. And then there's a couple. They mate for life, by the way, typically.
Oh wow.
There's a couple that lives right by my parents' house, and so when we were there over the winter, we had the window cracked one night, and right about 3 a.m. all of a sudden they started singing right at the foot of the yard. And cool. Woke me stuffed out of sound sleep, but it was awesome.
That's so cool.
Yeah, they're some of my favorite. If I wasn't an otter, I would probably be a coyote, actually.
Really? So we have to do our backup personas now?
That's my backup.
I told you what my backup was,
That's my failover fursona.
Your failover?
Yeah.
I don't get it. Failover?
That's an IT term. If you lose your, a business, your failover connection is, so if you lose your main internet connection, it'll automatically switch over within a second or so to a backup internet connection, which maybe isn't as good, but still works. You can still do your business. So that's my failover persona as a coyote.
But I've told you my failover persona then, right?
I don't know.
I'm a skunk.
Yeah, skunks are hot, man.
Well, fuck yeah, they are.
Skunks are hot.
It's a distinctive fur pattern.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
They're definitely hot.
The presumption that they smell terrible. I mean, that's also alluring.
Yeah. But I
like the idea of having a character
that
just make smell awful and just keep everybody away from them. Because that's, just the
You're such a fun guy. Yeah. You're an amazing fellow. Everybody, all our fans, when we go to our first...
Oh, I want to meet Toonses.
Hopefully, maybe next summer or something, we'll go to our first con together, together. We'll go to a con, and everybody will be like, oh, Skip, how good to see you. And they're like...
First of all, you're not dating?
And I'm like, can I talk to him, or is he going to, reject me, or whatever?
I do get called that guy.
That guy.
Off and on off.
That guy.
I've seen that. Oh, Toonses, that guy. You've never seen that for yourself? No. You've never seen, Skip, that guy?
No.
Toonses, that guy. I've seen
he's a good guy, though. He's really fun to hang out with, and it's just, you gotta learn to not listen to anything he's saying. And then he's
Thanks
okay.
for defending me, Skip. Thank you.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate
You're
you
welcome. But yes, we're not dating. I've been asked that a bunch,
too. Yeah, we're also not dating.
We both have boyfriends, so...
Yeah.
Sorry, and each other. Oh, yeah. Anyway, I think that's it, folks. So we will see you next week with a new show.
Probably.
No, we'll have a new show up. We'll have a new show up.
Yep.
We're not doing this.